Hi, I'm Ann Rieselbach, the Architectural League's Program Director. Welcome to the final night of presentations by the 2023 Emerging Voices. The Emerging Voices program, initiated during the Architectural League's 1981 centennial, exemplifies the League's ongoing commitment to recognize, encourage, and share meaningful work by emerging architects and designers. Each year, the Emerging Voices jury selects 8 practices based in the United States, Canada, or Mexico through an invited 2-step portfolio competition that recognizes talented individuals and firms with a distinct design voice and a body of accomplished work that has the potential to influence the disciplines of architecture, landscape architecture, and urbanism. Winners are selected based on a combination of the strength and impact of their realized work, a clearly articulated design philosophy, and their accomplishments within the design and academic communities, as well as more generally in the public realm. You can see the full list of 40 years of voices and learn more about the past 15 years or so winners, including short biographies, lecture videos, and interviews on the League's website, archleague.org. And word is that there are features on each winning firm, as they have every year, in the fresh off the press March, April Architects newspaper. More broadly speaking, this month-long series spotlights the myriad possibilities for contemporary practice, from advocacy and planning to materials research, installations, landscape design, and buildings, all in widely dispersed geographic locations with contrasting local conditions. Running through all the work, however, is a consistent attention to pressing societal and environmental concerns and the power of architecture and design to catalyze change. We are grateful for the time and expertise of the 2023 jury, Marie Adams, Fernanda Canales, Stephanie Davidson, Zach Mortiz, Mark Nouveau, Rashida Eng, Nader Tarani, Mario Gooden, and Shalina Ogbert, who considered all of these factors during the process of choosing the winners. On behalf of the League, I would also like to thank the series funders, beginning with principal supporters Elise Jaffe and Jeffrey Brown, both for their enthusiasm for this series and for their longtime commitment to encourage the work of young and emerging members of the design community. Support is also provided by the Next Generation Fund of the Architectural League, a group of past Emerging Voices and League Prize winners, and by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Emerging Voices public events and editorial features are made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. 2 members of the 2023 jury will serve as moderators for today's program. Fernanda Canales is an architect, designer, critic, and curator based in Mexico City. Her work has been supported by the Graham Foundation and has been exhibited at the Royal Academy of Arts, the IFA Gallery, and the Venice Biennale. She's the author of a number of publications, including Shared Structures, Private Space, as well as Architecture in Mexico, 1900 to 2010. She teaches and has recently been a visiting professor of architecture at Harvard University, Princeton, and Yale. Zach Mortiz is a design journalist and critic based in Chicago. He is a frequent contributor to Landscape Architecture magazine, Bloomberg's City Lab, New York Review of Architecture, and the Architects newspaper, among others. He's been a visiting critic at a number of schools nationwide, including, and I'm working from west to east here, Cal Poly Pomona, Iowa State University, IIT, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, the University of Illinois in Chicago and Urbana-Champaign, and the University of Pennsylvania. Fernanda and Zach will tag team their introductions for each of tonight's firms, and after the 2 presentations will follow up together with a conversation with the speakers. They will also pass along questions from the audience, which you should post in the Q&A section. League members should watch for information about CEUs, which will appear in the chat section towards the end of the presentations. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thanks as well to the Architecture League, the jury members, Zach, to the teams, the 2 teams that will be presenting today, and to everyone who is listening. It's an honor for me to be part of this initiative and a pleasure to introduce ORU, Office of Urban Resilience, a firm usually working in the outskirts of cities in Mexico, where the work of architects is rarely seen and not considered useful or not within reach. ORU, I would say it's a team of teams led by Elena Tudela, Adriana Chávez, and Rico from Mexico City, but working from Madrid, New York, and in places like Bogotá, Peru, or Mongolia. that represents an interesting shift in the way in which architects engage with communities, politicians, and resources, especially because they work against short-term visions with tight budgets and in places that lack organization and consensus. The jury was particularly interested in the way they engage in different scales, the way they redefine our notion of participation and broaden the scope of architects and the possibilities of collaboration. Their practice questions the idea of product, shifting the attention of architecture, not on buildings, but on multiple layers, mostly invisible, in order to find ways to construct balanced networks of infrastructure. They design not mere objects, but rather the process necessary to improve the conditions of places. I'll let them explain their work, but what captivated the jurors was the way they designed the connections or the assemblage of parts, inventing the links in order to turn needs, data, and budgets into a system or a platform prepared for contingencies. We were interested in the scope of their interventions that range from mapping and designing water management solutions to doing academic work, and from developing strategies for metropolitan regions to curating exhibitions. We found very appealing the ways strategies are linked to the people and to resources. And the words that came up while discussing their practice was land, labor, vacancies. ORU is a multilateral organization, teaming up people from different backgrounds and in different places, implementing order and structure within endless complexities. And they make us question not only who architecture is really for, but also where can design take us if the role of architects is not focused on the tangible or the apparently tangible. ORU is progressively becoming an important reference in Mexico and Latin America, setting up examples of how to link different stakeholders, such as nonprofit organizations, municipal governments, communities, doing research or working with huge construction companies, and implement efficient responses that help bridge the local and the global. In many ways, their practice offers the possibility to fill voids without necessarily filling them formally, and how to engage not in a limited site, but rather in its surrounding areas. And looking at their work, it is impossible not to question who are the makers of cities, of place, and to reflect on the legibility of architecture, the definition of authorship, and the many alternatives to redefine the interaction between people, institutions, and the environment. We were particularly driven by the way they turned the acts of imagination towards the production of methods that allow space for others to engage in solutions for fragmented territories. Transitioning from site-based detailed responses to a regional understanding and an interest in public space, architecture for ORU becomes a planning tool, a tool imagined to withstand risks. And in that sense, ORU offers an architecture that prepares the ground for solutions. So please join me in welcoming Elena, Adriana, and Victor. And once more, thank you all very much. And for anyone joining in the audience, please enter your questions or comments in the Q&A for our discussion following the presentation. And I'll hand it over to ORU for the first presentation.
Thank you, Fernanda, for that amazing introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go.
Hi, we are Adriana, Elena, and Victor, whose birthday is today, and we want to use this opportunity to also say happy birthday, Victor. We are very happy to be here. We are super excited to be selected by the Architectural League. And today we are going to be presenting ORU as a project. And we want to walk you through our practice, something like a behind the scenes tours. And this presentation will be divided in 3 sections. So first, you're going to know ORU as a network of people, who we are. Then we're going to unpack ORU's work, where we speak about some key concepts that drive our practice. And finally, ORU's vision for the future. So who we are. We are a network of people. We are a design practice with a critical lens towards resilience that advocates for scale-up design thinking to foster new futures of interconnected urban regions, strengthen ecological structure, and empower communities. And here's a picture of our amazing team in our Christmas party last year.
That's right, Adrian. That was such an amazing night, by the way, because we rarely are all together. Because Adria is in New York, Elena has a lot of her time in Madrid, and some team members don't live in Mexico City. Anyway, as a group, we feel very proud to adopt an inclusive approach that we think challenges patriarchal norms. And the real secret in our office is our super talented team and our amazing web of collaborators, as Fernanda already mentioned, with whom we have created a unique work environment. We want to say that without every single one of them, we wouldn't be here. So thank you very much, dear team and collaborators. In showing our previous experience, a lot of people ask us, how did you create ORU? Was it hard? And the answer is yes. The real answer or the extended answer is ORU didn't happen overnight. It took many years and experience acquisition in multiple sectors. In 2012, we crossed paths at Harvard Graduate School of Design. The following year, still as students, we collaborated with our friends Einat Rosenkrantz and Oscar Malaspina. Thank you guys, I believe you're watching, to submit an application to the Rockefeller Foundation Centennial Initiative, 100 Resilient Cities, on behalf of Mexico City's Ministry of Environment. To those unfamiliar with the initiative, it's a global platform that facilitates knowledge transfer between cities and promotes resilience as a transversal element in the planning and designing of cities. This was actually the first time we grappled in depth with the term resilience. And fortunately, Mexico City was selected in the first round, marking the beginning of our journey. When we came back to Mexico, we pursued different career paths. Elena focused on interdisciplinary urban environmental design research projects, becoming an associate professor at UNAM School of Architecture and the Laboratory of Sustainable Environments. Adriana joined the newly established Resilience Office in Mexico City as a result of that initiative we just talked about, and then worked on IDB's, Inter-American Development Bank's Mid-Cities program. Meanwhile, I, as Director of Special Projects of Mexico City's Public Space Authority, focused on spearheading several water-sensitive projects. And last but not the least, Guillermo, the fourth founder of ORU, was instrumental in driving the office's growth with an entrepreneurial and startup mindset, which proved crucial in the eventual founding of ORU finally in 2018. So one key message we want to share with everyone is you don't need to rush into opening a practice right away. Acquiring diverse experiences in multiple sectors is a very powerful mix. Now, in unpacking ORU's work, first of all, we'd like to share with you where we started our journey, then what resilience means to us, and some key concepts which we will illustrate using a few examples of our work. With these in mind, we'd like to invite everyone to reflect upon how we can challenge the traditional notion and scope of architecture and the design disciplines. So we started in Mexico City because that's where we're from. From the onset of our practice, we realized that working in the city allowed us to test ideas on resilience and sustainability in complex and very dynamic conditions. And we never cease to be amazed by these images. It's a Mexico City time lapse, which I produced back in 2014 and which almost made me cry in the computer lab because I wasn't being able to run the workflow to produce them and almost gave up, but here they are. And I mean, they're very telling about the past and present and hold some interesting clues towards the future. Also, Mexico City is fertile ground for experimentation, among other things, because of the risks it faces, ranging from water scarcity, earthquakes, social inequality, political tensions, geological faults, subsidence, among other stressors, but also due to its natural, social, and cultural resource availability. The city has taught us how to thrive when faced with complex challenges. As our practice's main context, we realize Mexico holds significant potential as a case study for current urban problems and as a platform for urban environmental integrated practices. Its geological, geographical, and topographical condition positions the country as one of the world's mega-diverse countries, holding almost 70% of its biodiversity. Mexico is one of 8 Vavilov centers, which are centers of origin of cultivated plants, where domestication started, also considered centers of diversity, which also translates into a multicultural and multilingual rich territory. Working in Mexico has allowed us to bridge design with global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, water management, and land use changes.
So following up on what Victor was just saying in terms of Latin America as a testing ground, we recognize the urgent need to address the impact of climate change as one of the main challenges of our civilization currently speaking, particularly on impoverished and unequal regions. So we have broadened our research to encompass Latin America as well, not only Mexico at first. This region, much like Mexico, is poised to bear the brunt of the extreme consequences of climate change, making it an important area for research to focus on. So this regional exploration allows us to work closer with ecological design at large in a very meaningful way, one that transcends greenwashing and commonplace perspectives and incorporates resilience as a fundamental capacity to adapt to present and also future challenges. As we embrace this way of thinking, Mexico and Latin America have become a valuable laboratory for us in experimenting and learning, not only in terms of risk and resilience, as this slide shows, but also regarding our shared colonial past. We're currently very interested in understanding emerging decolonization discourse and processes, not only from a historical, pre-Hispanic perspective, but projecting into Latin Americans' present and future as well. So, designing through resilience. As the name of our office suggests, we're using resilience as a guiding principle for design. And it has been a consistent thread throughout our practice ever since the beginning. Unfortunately, its recent widespread and generalized use has caused its definition to dilute, and the term, resilience, to lose meaning when it most needs clarification and depth. Adopting this lens has profoundly influenced our approach to projects, prompting us to reflect on our role as designers of the urban environment and the impact our work can have in shaping the future. Designing with resilience, for us, breaks down our sense of order and habitual structures of seeing and understanding the world. It requires accepting uncertainty, yielding control, integrating design with non-design, and being open to multiple desirable scenarios, not just one solution. It demands a keen sense of observation, recognizing that architecture is co-produced, and that in this way, we can better decide where and when to design and when and where to withdraw. It also requires a spatially and temporally multi-scalar approach, something that's very relevant to us, which has brought us also closer to mapping tools and visualization resources. Since resilience is a capacity, neither good or bad in itself, it requires clarity of objectives and to define whom we build resilience for. So we seek resilience basically for vulnerable human and non-human collectivities, which involves coordination and mediation between distinct needs, aspirations, and visions. We were invited, this image that you're looking at here shows the invitation we got to be editors of the digital magazine Revista for El Eco's Experimental Museum in its 4th volume, which we named Resilient Urbanism and Plastic Elasticity. In turn, we invited 5 architects, artists, and collectives to create a resilient act each that we discussed as a group and transcribed for the magazine. And you're looking at some of those results. We used those arguments to create fictitious letters talking about the city and resilience between characters such as Vittorio Gregotti, Jane Jacobs, and the designer of El Eco's museum, the renowned artist, German artist, Matthias Geritz.
So how do we design with resilience? This is an example. We designed 2 resilient public spaces in Los Cabos, the Shade and Water Garden project. We did with Juliana Arroyo, Viren's Paisaje, and a team of UNAM specialists. We embrace the question of how we can integrate resilience to public spaces in marginalized areas, in the aridest state and the most striking by hurricanes and tropical storms in Mexico. The two projects were developed under the Mexico's Urban Improvement Program deployed by SEDATU, which is a federal agency that overlooks urban development in the country. Our response was to design two projects that pursued three specific objectives. First, the microclimatic. We wanted to provide shade, which is crucial for creating a public space in the context of extreme heat waves. The second is social, to design an inclusive and adaptable recreational space in two of Los Cabos' most marginalized neighborhoods. And third, resilient, to generate a multifunctional structure that can act as a logistic shelter whenever there's a hurricane, or in case of the water garden, by designing a set of terrace systems to hold water and prevent floods. What we like most about these projects is that the community takes ownership and care of them and uses all them intensively, as you can see in this video. The second key concept we want to show you is scale-up design and systemic thinking. We understand that conventional architectural tools are insufficient when dealing with planetary, social, environmental, and urban phenomena. Therefore, we embrace systemic thinking and open-ended approaches to address such challenges. We design and construct systems and identify sensible relations to the site, considering its broader social context and timescales. We also consider a process where projects will evolve and sustain over time. An example of this is a family of 5 projects we designed in Tultitlan in the state of Mexico. Another opportunity we had to participate in Mexico's Urban Improvement Program. Tultitlan is an area with a large percentage of the population below poverty and high levels of violence. These projects represented a unique opportunity for collective work. This time, we collaborated with our very dear friends and colleagues, Departamento del Distrito, Taller, Ricardo Garcia, Vires Paisaje, Elizabeth Lopez, Alison Steiger, and Cesar Avila. We undertook this challenge, particularly under limited budgets and time constraints. The 5 projects include a public library and an auditorium, a fire station, which also includes a sports courtyard, retrofitting a sports facility, a cultural center, and a municipal market. Design-wise, as you can see, they all share formal and material strategies that fosters the manufacturing and construction economy using local labors and materials for Tultitlan. Specifically, these projects provided jobs for the local communities by using the site's industrial materials such as steel, while accommodating facilities for a growing vulnerable population and seeking to offer safe public infrastructure in an area of high criminal activity rates. We can improve the quality of life through design and create spaces in the community that can take ownership. This collaboration was a great responsibility and challenge that we have assumed with great care and interest in our practice. Another example is Bogota's environmental circuit, a project in Colombia that involved reimagining Bogota as a city that strategically integrates its primary hydrological elements as structural components for future planning. We developed this project with Taller architects Mónica Arzós and Manuela Guzmán. The outcome was a comprehensive vision, including a system of projects that aim to transform the city while enhancing resilience in the face of current and future challenges. You can see in the taxonometric the various set of projects that we developed. Our approach involved observing and understanding complex interdependencies, visualizing systems, and identifying vulnerabilities as opportunities for design to reimagine a new relationship with water.
Another key idea we want to share with you is our understanding of design as a tool that contributes to collective intelligence. Now, this idea, design as a tool, is one we'd love everyone to reflect upon. The world has been mainly narrated from the Western perspective of the white man. We must recognize and value the multiplicity of lifestyles, beliefs, aspirations, and habits among which we must live collectively. This in turn implies recognition that everyone designs and shapes their environment, whatever their backgrounds is, and regardless of whether or not they're designers. As Hashim Sarkis, a dear friend and professor of ours, puts it in his publication, The World as an Architectural Project, architecture has a cognitive role. It gives us tools to understand the spatial, technological, and social processes that are shaping the planet in order to define the types and scales of architectural intervention that can cope with the ways in which globalization is happening. Now, reflecting upon this quote, we are convinced that design must go beyond a problem-solving or object-making approach. Through research, we inform multiple sensitivities that allows us to understand the intricate ecological, social, technical, and political configurations that must seamlessly align to bring complex projects to fruition. And one project that exemplifies this principle is the BioCities initiative we developed for GIZ, the German Development Agency, and Deltares, which is a Dutch applied research institute specializing in delta technology and geotechnics. The project focused on 3 coastal regions in Mexico: Los Cabos in the Pacific Ocean, Boca del Rio in the Gulf of Mexico, and Bacalar and Otompe Blanco in the Caribbean Sea. The project started by exposing social vulnerabilities and urban environmental conflict in the studied regions. Subsequently, through a participatory approach, we identified, listed, and mapped out potential actions such as conservation, protection, and restoration through management plans and public spaces with infrastructural attributes to improve these areas' ecosystem services. And finally, we used a multi-criteria methodology to select 4 critical actions and projects and developed a corresponding roadmap for their implementation. And we are currently developing the conceptual designs of some of these green infrastructure projects. So the overarching goal of this project is to foster a better understanding among diverse sectors of society, but particularly government, of the vital role that ecological structures play in maintaining the health and resilience of urban environments. And that is key to invest in them. In other words, it aims to spark a broader movement towards more sustainable and resilient urban infrastructure by increasing awareness of the benefits of ecological retrofitting and ultimately promoting a healthier and more resilient future in coastal regions.
So finally, the last key concept that we'll be talking about in this presentation tonight is the collaborative work for a new model of inhabitation. And so the idea that designers work individually is currently outdated. The problems of the 21st century require collective thinking and action. So collaborative work allows us to portray more informed and more sensitive spatial imaginations that can later crystallize into more comprehensive and sustainable forms of co-inhabiting our planet. So beyond, if you can move to the next. So beyond the production of knowledge and strategies, we believe design can also produce collective narratives to promote inclusivity, broaden empathy, which is a term we're very keen on, and challenge systemic biases. Here you can see a series of workshops we coordinated where we tested a collaborative methodology to envision a sustainable model to manage water in Mexico City in a more sustainable way. Collaborative storytelling allows for a better understanding of our shared human experience and creates more authentic and representative narratives. This enables us to steer away from the anthropocentric approach in the design disciplines and include non-human entities such as water, ecosystems, and other agents of the living world, which we also depend upon. In reality, ORU is more than just a mere organization. It's an ecosystem teeming with diverse people and collaborators, as Fernanda was just speaking of in our introduction, all coming together to achieve a common goal. With every project we undertake, we have the power to compress or extend our network, forging solid and interdisciplinary teams to design integral processes from its inception to its maintenance that intend to push the limits of what's possible.
Sorry, just a minute.
It's okay. So Hydric Districts is an excellent example of our collaborative work and a project we're very fond of. It is an applied research project developed through 3 different contracts in different timeframes and 1 research grant with collaborators such as Anita Berrizbeitia from Harvard University, Arsos Arquitectos, World Resource Institute Mexico, TAF Engineering, Mexico City's Water Fund, and Tec de Monterrey. The Hydric Districts model represents an urban territorial planning tool that places the idea of water as a resource at the center of the discussion of urban development and public space creation. This contributes to urban resilience by facing the current water crisis, which is currently very bad for Mexico City and for many other cities in the world, for that case. Hydric districts operate at the intermediate scale as a base unit for the systemic and integral operation and implementation of interventions. So this is the first time we started putting that mid-size portion of the city at the center of our practice. Its structure is based on a shared vision that pursues local, participatory, decentralized, sustainable, and circular economy management in a specific territory composed of neighborhoods or blocks that share certain identity features. Also, it can be replicated in different areas of the city as long as public and private promoters are interested in carrying it out. It is an experiment not only on collective engagement between stakeholders or people, or institutions, but physically between projects and buildings within the district that require shared infrastructures to actually meet the supply and demand of different types of water qualities, for example, stormwater, gray water, or sewage. We're close to finishing a publication to share its findings and current results as a research project yet to be implemented, hopefully sometime soon. Since it was built collectively, it does not belong to us, even when we keep working towards its implementation and evolution. As Pierre Belanger, a very dear professor of us 3, would put it, it's an open-ended, imprecise, and uncertain project which leaves room for others to enter and complete our work. At that point, it becomes our own. We're not afraid of letting go and giving away our ideas.
Lastly, ORU's vision for the future. One of ORU's main interests is the possibility of a better future and questioning our role as designers to contribute to its shaping. We have a brief window to successfully respond to the environmental and social crisis we are immersed in, conferring a sense of urgency to human action. With this in mind, we are focused on 5 actions we actively pursue.
So first, promoting design and production of actionable ideas that hold meaningful impact. Then mediating without imposition and exclusion interests, visions, and needs aligned or conflicting. Participating in a culture of collective narratives, human and non-human engagement and dialogue. Learning and collaborating with different people, specialists, communities, fields of knowledge, and disciplines. And finally, exploring new tools to observe, analyze, and model the world from a design perspective.
To close up, we seek to bridge the technical with the creative, the practical and the academic, the local and the global, people and institutions, and the research with the projection. We try to imprint in our projects, regardless of their scale, from installations and exhibitions, which we're looking at right now in the screen, to regional strategic plans, a sense of optimism towards the future. We're very interested in exploring curatorial, exhibition, installation, and media projects that have allowed us to synthesize and communicate our ideas to a broader and different public. Building ORU has been quite a ride. With the ideas we have shared with you today in mind, we can assert that for us, our most challenging and rewarding project is the design of our own unique practice that will continue to seek to have a positive impact in cities and basically to foster better future alternatives. If you can finish off with this slide where we want to thank again our fantastic team and all of our collaborators, many more which are not here, we also like to thank. We are very grateful for your support, New York Architectural League's team, all jurors, our moderators, and TERREMOTO, and all of you that joined us today. Hopefully we can persuade some of you to join our cause, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Zach Mortiz here to introduce TERREMOTO. Again, I want to thank the Architecture League, Fernando, my fellow juror, and ORU and TERREMOTO. Yeah, let's dive in. So TERREMOTO does stylish but slightly wrinkled jeans and t-shirt landscape architecture. They see landscapes and especially gardens as messy, unruly, evolving sites of growth and accumulation that don't try to pretend otherwise. They're shaping diverse plant material into texture and space. It's stripped down, lo-fi, tactical, utilitarian, and often cheap, which is not an epithet here. This approach forgoes singular statement plants asserted in fields of green turf, not just because such an approach would be a comical waste of resources in their native Southern California, but also because TERREMOTO is crafting view corridors and secret retreats, places to be together with piles and piles of plant matter. They've mastered the art of using California's native flora to build a sense of compression and release, blind corridors defined by dense but loose plantings, and places to get lost in that resist a singular postcard view. Whether it's a backyard garden or a park underneath a tangle of transit infrastructure, what comes across most fervently in the work of TERREMOTO is its complete lack of edges, lack of a staunch division between one material and programmatic threshold into another. There are no seams because everything is connected in a rambling and convivial story of immersion in the landscape. The firm relished process and this lack of resolution, both for programmatic or aesthetic reasons, like in their Marinship project, where TERREMOTO left trees and planting boxes alongside boulders and woodblock benches for a meditation garden with indeterminate plans for future building. They've assembled gardens from discarded concrete and rebar from demolished buildings for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Although their creative class, upmarket clientele sometimes sport Instagram feeds as relentlessly curated and followed as their very own, they fill their landscapes with dumpster diving treasures, pulling shards of basalt from stone yard scrap piles. This focus on process over final product extends to how TERREMOTO depicts their work, always documenting the time, the material, and the labor that brings each landscape to its final but unfinished state of fulfillment pending growth, and how they select and structure the projects they take on. Getting their hands dirty in this way has led them to pay greater attention to the people in their world for whom a hands-on relationship with the landscape is required. The landscapers and builders who make all this possible. Apart from paying their own staff an hourly wage to properly compensate their time, TERREMOTO has become an industry leader in valuing the work of their partners in the landscape installation trades. They've made clients' willingness to compensate all members of the landscape team, including laborers, fairly, a screening mechanism. They've established a baseline understanding of what the working conditions of landscapers actually are. They've worked with relevant labor advocacy groups, and most importantly, they press the issue with their clients, even when it's uncomfortable. This kind of work is very often done by Black and brown undocumented laborers whose precarity and vulnerability gives employers leverage to pay exceptionally low wages without benefits, and then wrap this justification in the false, racist, and classist trope of the unskilled worker. Through their example, TERREMOTO point out that while landscape architects are adept at talking up their commitment to ecological sustainability and the enlightening biophilic benefits of access to nature, and they're getting better at hyping their commitment to demographic diversity, they are not good at acknowledging the labor crisis that exists among people that make this work come together. TERREMOTO have also found that looking to landscape laborers as a resource to inform their designs yields concrete benefits, and that not treating landscape labor fairly is a powerful indicator that the landscape itself won't be cared for or maintained. A less important factor here that's still ostensibly held in common by the entire project team. This obsession with how things are made, how they'll be maintained defines TERREMOTO, whose landscapes are always in evolution and formation. And with that, I can think of nothing better to do than turn over to David Godshall and Story Wiggings to hear more about their work.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, ORU, and everyone at the Architectural League, and everybody who's watching. I'm David.
I'm Story.
And we're just going to jump into it. Give me one moment. Oops. Akin to, I'm so thankful to have gotten to hear everything ORU said, and I think in many ways we are kindred spirits in terms of like acknowledging that our work, especially in this collective moment, as we, I think, are all realizing the folly of kind of the Starchitect model in lieu of a more democratic and kind of like dispersed notion of credit. We want to like deeply acknowledge that though Story and I are kind of here before you, we are here on behalf of our team as well, and all the work that we do is made possible because we are a team. We're going to talk about office structure for just a moment. We believe that it's important for us to do this because we find it actually problematic that at some point in recent architectural history that reputation and or legacy has been decoupled from what's it like to work at the office. And we actually think that office structure and culture is wildly relevant. And I appreciated Oru talking about this as well. And in this instance, part of the reason we do this is because all this stuff that we do, like kind of internally, or in terms of how we run our team, we also believe that like by structuring our office in a different way that interestingly informs built work. So a few things, we'll kind of go through this quickly, but we pay hourly. Every hour over 40 hours a week is paid as time and a half. We generally only work 40 hours a week. I think there's a rumbling coming. I think that we're all sensing right now in that architectural practice has like for too long kind of done the overwork thing, and that's problematic at a variety of levels. And so we don't play that game. Full benefits, that's insurance, and that's kind of collectively authored in terms of whether we do dental and all these things, and it's kind of an ongoing conversation. We have a mega soft hierarchy, is how I've written it here. And insofar as it's as egalitarian as is possible, in that it's an office of 26 people split between both Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I should say that I help run the Los Angeles office, and Story helps run the San Francisco practice to kind of give you a little bit more kind of context. Everyone has a seat at the table. And so I kind of wrote the term supportive autonomy insofar as we find that people thrive when they have a lot of, when they have skin in the game and when the project that they're working on is meaningfully theirs. We're deeply skeptical of more typical top-down power hierarchies where there's one person at the top and then kind of it goes down from there. That leads to burnout and or dissatisfaction. And this relationship to power or the lack thereof, we believe also becomes present in our built work in interesting ways. And we'll kind of circle back to that as we kind of go through. A yearly retreat, 40 hours a year, volunteer time, a community action fund. This is a thing that we do so that we kind of tithe or donate to good causes together. And we do this with our clients. We recently started a profit sharing program. The first 3 financial quarters of the year, we share 20% of profit completely equally across the office. You have to work at the office for, I think, 2 years in order to start qualifying for this. But we're only a year into this, and we're tinkering with improving this model. And yeah, the above sentences, all of this is always changing. I really appreciated Oru saying Oru as a project, and the way you express that is beautiful. And we are kindred spirits in that regard, and that we're always trying to look at like kind of this more boring technical structural admin stuff is actually so important. And too often people haven't been talking about it. So it was a joy to hear you guys speak about it. And so it's kind of why we express this to you as well. And we talk, just as this is at one of our retreats, it's important as a team to constantly be interrogating how and why we practice, down to why we use the materials that we use, to why we create forms in the way we create, and who our clients are, and how we should go about spending our time as an office well. Like, what is time well spent is increasingly like an interesting question to us, and balancing like a diversity of project types as well. Sorry.
So I'm going to run through some themes that inform our practice, just some things that we're constantly thinking about. This is kind of a short list because time is limited, but I'll run through quickly and then elaborate a bit in the next slides. So kind of the #1 rule, do right by the site. No detail is the best detail. We really want to keep things simple. We try to minimize demolition on sites, use hyperlocal materials and plants, but not in any sort of dogmatic way. We believe builders and artisans are our allies and collaborators, and we believe in truth and reconciliation for Native people and honoring indigenous land practices. And as a basis for all of this, we try, always to stay humble and keep asking questions. We're not experts and we're always learning as we go. So doing right by the site, what does that mean? Basically, we come to a site, there's a client who has hired us and is paying us, but there's kind of this second client on every project, which is the landscape itself and the context. And we always try to listen to that and listen to the land and kind of do what it's calling for. So sometimes that wants to be something really flamboyant and kind of assertive and outward looking, kind of like this image on the left. And sometimes it's something really quiet and more about just healing a landscape that has long been uncared for or is suffering in some way, kind of like the image on the right. This idea of no detail is the best detail is kind of part of the DNA, I would say, of TERREMOTO from the beginning. And that's not to say that we don't appreciate a clever detail or a really beautiful idea executed well, but in terms of how we come to a project, we're really looking to the material to lead the way and trying to like mess with it as little as possible. And also making adjustments on site so that what happens in a project reflects what's actually going on in reality rather than something that was going on in our heads when we were in a black hole CAD. We try not to demolish the existing traces in a landscape. We like to say that like the least interesting project to us is a flat site that's been scraped and raised and has no existing character. And that's kind of a two-pronged thing. One, we think that it adds a lot of texture and interest, and then on the other side, it's just a more sustainable approach. So rather than rebuild something, let's see if we can work with what's there and also with vegetation. So trying to remove as little mature vegetation on a project as possible for obvious reasons. Working with hyperlocal materials and plants. This is something we're getting a bit more intentional about, but it's always kind of been part of the practice. We find that local materials tend to sit really well in the site and feel appropriate, and that you also gain kind of a beautiful network of people as you're sourcing local materials, as you're working with people in the community who provide those materials. Same thing with native plants. Those provide ecosystem services that horticultural species do not, and they also just work really well and look really beautiful. And it's kind of an acquired taste, but we really hope that that's gonna catch on and or continue to catch on. Builders and gardeners are our collaborators. So we really cannot do what we do without the people who build and maintain our projects. And we feel, because we work so closely with them, that it's just really essential that they're getting the same accolades as us, that they're having the same respect for their work, and that they're getting remunerated accordingly as well, making living wage. And this is sort of like on a very individual level, like the people that we worked with directly, we want to do right by them. And then, you know, looking more big picture, we think that this is inherently linked to the climate crisis that we find ourselves in. Like, there's a real problem with the idea that land-based work is sort of the lowest rung on the ladder, and that kind of reveals a real disconnect between our culture and the natural landscape. And we think it's a fertile ground for exploration. We work on stolen land. So working in the United States, that's always the case. I'm beaming in from Ramaytush Ohlone land, and David is calling from Tongva and Tataviam land. We think that it's really important to keep this at top of mind because we're a land-based practice. And we think that not only do we need to recognize that these people are still here today and making their community and culture, and also we have a lot to learn from them. So by having those interesting and difficult conversations, we can move forward in a better way. And staying humble, because we approach projects from this sort of exploratory, experimental, testing mindset. We're always sort of at the beginning and never, you know, masters of our trade. We're coming to this just asking questions and with the beginner's mind, and that kind of keeps things fresh and exciting, and also sometimes hard.
Thank you, Story. We're going to now jump into 3 projects that we hope that in small ways kind of dive or unpack kind of the themes and beliefs or principles that Story just said, and kind of show how we walk our talk. So we'll start with Platform Park. This is a park to situate you. It's in Culver City. The kind of MTA lines, or Metropolitan Transit Authority, that's a light rail that goes from one point of Los Angeles to another. Contrary to popular belief, Los Angeles does have a meager public transportation system, but this particular site found itself in the understory or in the underbelly of these tracks. And it was an interesting project because just to the left, where you see I'm wiggling my mouse over here, there is a mall, I guess for lack of a shopping center, that has managed to smartly somehow survive the death of all malls across the United States. And the developers, and we only very skeptically work with developers. That's a whole lecture unto itself. But in this case, after multiple conversations with them, we realized that their hearts were in the right place insofar as they realized that though they didn't own this land, that they were willing to spend their own money, several $100,000 of their own money, on improving land that they didn't own immediately adjacent to their shopping center, so that they could create like the civic green space of this community, in that a lot of offices, when we built the park, a lot of offices were being constructed across the street. This is what it looked like before. Prior to us arriving, essentially these light rail, for lack of a better, tracks were built. And in the wake of that, essentially this was just a flat site. And contrary to what Story just said, we're usually not interested in a flat scrape site. In this instance, we did get actually a flat scrape site. So it became a function of looking at that and understanding what to do with it. This was a project that the first project that we most meaningfully tested our hyperlocal materials thesis on. And what we did is we set a metric for ourselves to see if that we could build a landscape where all the materials came from with 100 miles of the project site itself. So and we weren't going to be overly dogmatic about it, but we wanted to see like, let's test this concept out. Can it be done? And the answer is that it can be done, and that it comes with aesthetic kind of constraints, but those constraints are interesting to us in that we're interested in what a new vernacular might look like in like our globally interconnected world, where you can kind of get anything from everywhere, but we're kind of interested in rejecting that idea and kind of returning to like locality for reasons both environmental as well as like poetic, and in that working with local materials creates economic resilience. The wood that you see here was from Angel City Lumber, which is a lumber yard that essentially takes wood that is coming down throughout Los Angeles and then intercepts it before it gets to a trash mill and then repurposes it. And so that's kind of this log you see here. I should also mention that on the TERREMOTO team, Rachel Tucker and Diego Lopez were the lead designers. This is our builder, Chad Johnston of Johnson Vidal Projects. And in this project, we hired actually a planting consultant because we love to collaborate with others. And his name is Jonathan Freunds. And this is us staring at all the possible gravels that one can source from within 100 miles of Los Angeles. We ultimately went with a mix that's called Palm Springs Gold, which that's about the farthest we got. It's quarried about 98 miles from the project site itself. This is Johnson Vidal Projects installing these logs and these boulders. Again, we're very hands-on on site. We do plans, of course, but we try to leave room for serendipity and insight improvisation to the best of our ability. And this is kind of what it looks like shortly after install. A mural went in. The wood that you see on these boxes and beyond is from lumber from Angel City Lumber. The plants, though not, this project wasn't actually fully native. This was a little bit prior to us really doubling down on using mostly native species. I'd say this is about 30% native species, 40%, but it's an extremely low water landscape. And actually the sun conditions that we encountered were very interesting. And so in a way, we try to keep program to a minimum. We think a lot of American like civic and institutional spaces are plagued by over-programming. And we wanted this to be kind of allow a person to wander and make their own kind of like way through it as well. The boulders that you see here are a result of the fact that where these concrete pylons went down, we encountered giant steel footings, so we weren't able to actually do planting in those zones. So as kind of a slight joke, we pretended that they were acts of a geological emergence or a terremoto. So that's why that explains that. And it's an interesting, we're very actually like, I think I'd like for, at least in American landscapes, there's a funny thing where it's sometimes looked down upon for landscapes to have like an ability to economically like justify themselves. And I think that's part of the problem why, especially in Los Angeles, public space is like underutilized and underfunded. And so I'm respectful of the fact that now the people, our clients who spent a bunch of money working on this, do rent it out, and there are like social engagements and things like that. And we think that that's perfectly fine in a privately owned public space such as this. So this was an interesting first endeavor in understanding, creating a new local vernacular and sourcing hyperlocal materials.
Okay, I'm gonna just run through this project. This is the Sea Ranch Lodge. We're incredibly honored to be chosen to work on kind of a redevelopment of this lodge that had become a bit torn down. We of course learned about the Sea Ranch project in school and saw it in museums, and then came to this project just like, wow, what an honor. And the landscape itself kind of makes you feel that anyway when you go there. It's a planned community 100 miles north of San Francisco, built in the late 60s. So when we arrived, they had just sort of finished, or they were just finishing renovating the buildings, which, you know, were just gorgeous, and they did a wonderful job with that. But the landscape itself, it seemed had never really been accomplished. Like there was just asphalt right up to the front door. There were all kinds of crazy plants that looked like somebody just went to Home Depot and picked up a truckload. It just sort of didn't make sense, and it didn't fit into the landscape. And so we really saw our job as kind of bringing back a little bit of this Lawrence Halprin magic, Driftwood Village vibe, eco score into the landscape. So that's kind of what we were getting at in the rendering on the left. We came, you know, wanting to be reverent of the history of the site, but not just to take it as you know, as like without being critical. So we wanted to take a fresh look at these principles, and we found that they're a little bit overly binary, but we actually agreed with most of them in theory, and we really were like rooting for Sea Ranch to have a kind of second coming that would allow it to really become what it originally intended to be, which is a thriving community that is diverse and you know, has all like schools and shops and things. So we're you know, a bit critical, and trying to have a fresh approach, but also honoring the existing conditions. I would be remiss not to mention there is a extremely laborious review process involved in working in this place, and we have some questions about the way that is handled. It's a very top-down approach, and sometimes lacks nuance, but we also are really grateful for their guidance, and felt like they really pushed us to just get simpler, and do the very least amount possible. So there was always kind of this guiding question of like, is that necessary? And so we really, you know, we went in kind of quietly, but we even still were like reeling ourselves back from over designing, and that's been a gift and something that we've taken with us to other projects. Because this is such a rural site, it is kind of inherently set up for using hyperlocal materials. There just isn't the option to run out to the stone yard and pick, you know, from their wide selection of materials. So when we said we wanted some boulders, we were taken to the ranch next door, and we spoke with Leland, who also runs the sheep on the Sea Ranch, and he kind of worked with Amani, who is a logger, and they worked, you know, extracted these boulders in the best way from his ranch lands. And same with the you can flip, David. These benches you can see on the upper right-hand side, these sort of timber benches were created from the trees in the famous hedgerows, which are kind of reaching the end of their lifespan and being replaced. And so how can we pull those trees out of the waste stream and use them and create this vernacular of the cypress bench? You know, everyone up there has like crazy big machinery. There's a real community vibe that's sort of inherent to the project, and we really loved working with everyone and getting to know the place. This was actually an accident. The sheep who grazed the commons at the Sea Ranch got loose and had a field day in our newly planted landscape. But we found that it actually totally like kicked off the growing season, and that things came in really well. And yeah, I just think it's interesting to be thinking about these alternative management strategies for landscape that are a bit old-fashioned in a way, but also very forward-thinking. And so this wall, the beautiful concrete wall here in the front, is a remnant from the previous landscape. So trying to use the existing as much as possible, and then provide access. So really, accessibility was not really a thing when this building was designed and built. So we were trying to really subtly make these spaces accessible without calling attention to it. And then on the right, you can see that's kind of like the extent of the designer's hand in the landscape was, you know, having these bollards like disappear into the planting. You know, we did place these boulders at the top of the hill, but it's not really clear that we did. It was really like an exercise in trying to like hide our work and really allow the focus to be on this experience of being out in the landscape, out in the wildness with these different layers of history. Yeah, so I think always something to think about going forward is like, how can we get out of the way and just let the landscape speak? Do the least amount possible to get people where they're going and make them, you know, somewhat comfortable or uncomfortable depending, and yeah, and let it really be about the elements.
And I'll go fast through the end. Thank you, Story. We'll wrap up with our 7th Avenue garden with David Horvitz. This is a garden that has been a wonderful testing ground for a lot of I would say, less conventional ideas that we kind of have rumbling underneath about how we practice and why we practice. This is the space. In the foreground is David Horvitz. He's a friend of the office, and he's an artist, has kind of a very interesting conceptual art practice. If you Google him, you can find him. A very interesting guy. His studio is across the street from this site here. He had long been looking at this vacant lot. A house had burned down, and he found out who owned the house, approached the owner of the land and asked if he could build a garden in this space, and we were granted permission. So we don't own the land, David doesn't own the land. The landlord technically does own the land, but I think one of the first subtexts to this project is a questioning of what ownership means. And I think in this moment with the crises we face, both ideas of property ownership and ownership of ideas is something that we are increasingly calling to question. So as like a starting point, we find that like to have like resonance. And so we started simply through talking about what the garden could be, what it could look like. And in an interesting way, in passing, I almost mentioned to David, you know, they're in the process of destroying certain buildings at LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, to build the new Zumthor building. We knew that there was a big demo site. David made a few phone calls, and within 48 hours, we found ourselves at this demolition site, and LACMA kindly allowed us to collect rubble. So the first thing that we did is collect detritus from Los Angeles itself, and then bring it to the job site. And in a very interesting way, one of the main themes of this garden, I think, is emergence. Rather than drawing like a plan and deciding what it should be, like really both the materials and the spatial like layout of the garden are very much emergent of conversation and process, and like kind of through serendipity. And so we went and selected like pieces of detritus that we wanted to use from LACMA, and we brought them to the site. Why should we go and extract boulders from some place that's far away and bring them to site when our city can actually provide us with everything that it needs? And also in doing so, kind of poetically challenge the notion of like what a boulder is and why a boulder is and what it brings to the garden. We then, again, hyperlocal materials, came up with some ideas of zones we wanted to like create things. And so we use locally milled wood. In this project, we very much questioned the use of a plan. To our earlier point about like our relationship to power, we're increasingly skeptical of conventional representations of power, especially the plan. And believe me, we use plans, but we're thinking deeply as an office in that plans kind of belie a human supremacist view of land in that we can impose our vision upon it. And in that we don't want to create gardens that impose human dominion on land anymore. We're also becoming skeptical of how we go about designing and representing what it is that we want to do, in that we're more interested in making gardens that are useful, that almost equate the usefulness of the garden to humans as they do to wildlife, birds, earthworms. And two stories earlier points about doing right by the land, like thinking about, well, is this space we're making good for worms? Is it good for water? Is it kind to water? Do we let water penetrate like into the ground? And so we kind of experimented with alternate modes of representation and thinking and kind of how we might go about expressing our ideas. And I'm going to go fast because I know we're over time. So as an office and as a team and as a community and as other artists and as people who live in the neighborhood, the garden is open in a sense. It's not open all the time. It does have a fence, but we're kind of figuring out how to navigate that distinction between public and private, because back to our notion of ownership of land is kind of the root of a lot of the problems we feel and our property development. So this garden like calls a lot of those things into question. And you see this is a stand that we made that a hawk now visits as well. And then since then, what's been very exciting and serendipitous and unexpected is that the garden is now like useful to a lot of people and a lot of communities in different sorts of ways. This is, in this instance, it was useful to David. He asked a fellow artist to have like an event with music and chimes. We're also exploring ideas of, it's a funny thing to me that in landscape maintenance, we clean up a landscape and then we take all of that material or that refuse off site. Whereas we're interested in exploring the idea of, could a garden be designed that deals with its own trash, composting and decomposition? We believe that we should be making space for those sorts of things within the garden itself, and are interested in like the aesthetic ramifications of like what that means. And a German artist came to the garden and actually was critical and said that our garden was lacking water, but we have no water in Southern California and we have no power or electricity in this garden. So she actually made a clay basin that now is a puddle. So when it rains, it acts as a puddle. And so kind of making as much room as we can for others to use it, for the usefulness of others to use it as well. And so it's been this interesting drift in rather than superimposing like a plan and a design onto a landscape, letting the design and the usefulness in the program and the way a place look be emergent rather than like top down. And I think this speaks to, in many senses, how we're trying to like redefine our power, our relationship to power, both like within our office, as well as like how power manifests in landscapes, in that our human supremacist like predilections have kind of gotten us into an ecological pickle with climate change. And so this garden has been a real wonderful place to ask ourselves as an office is if there might be another way. And what's most exciting to us is that I think that this could scale. And though I don't think that the impulse or the human need to scale everything is also a root of the problem, but I think like a public open space like could actually like start orienting to things that are like more manifest by the community in which they find themselves, rather than a designer from like elsewhere coming to the site and imposing their kind of vision on it. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. So we ran a little bit over. We apologize and thank you.
Okay, let's duck into a little bit of Q&A with TERREMOTO and ORU. Thanks again for your presentation. So I think we very much like to hear some questions from our audience. You can drop those right in the chat anytime. Maybe to get started though, I've got a question I think that applies to both ORU and TERREMOTO. I've noticed that, aesthetically, there's a very kind of lo-fi, in some ways improvisational, using very like kind of modest material palettes going on. Landscapes and these buildings for ORU, and that's interesting to me because you work for different audiences in very different geographic and cultural contexts. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about your ideas behind this sort of convergence. Has the internet completely leveled culture? Has the economics of design demanded that lo-fi, low budget is the way to go, no matter who's paying or what it's for? Yeah, I'm interested in what you think about that convergence.
ORU, you want to start?
Okay, we can start. Well, I mean, in terms of the aesthetic qualities that you were mentioning, Zach, I think we understand our projects or our designs much more in terms of platforms where other people sort of like come in and complete them. So some of the part we enjoy a lot about our projects is going back and seeing how those aesthetic values originally placed in those projects are now changing and being appropriated by different types of users or communities. So to us, there's a value in that. So we don't want to impose an aesthetic. It's just probably the aesthetic we sort of like have while designing. And then, things shift, and that's where we're interested in. And in terms of what you were mentioning about low budgets and whether it matters who's paying or how much, I think, and this is just my opinion, that no project should cost not only monetarily, but also like socially, culturally, or environmentally speaking, should not cost that much, no matter where it's done. I mean, that's probably what ORU believes, but we haven't discussed it openly. But the world can't afford to, make those costs. So I think whether we're working for a private client or a public one, which is where we're more comfortable with or where we're more used to, or that's where most of our projects lie within, I think we should not be spending that much money in things that are not necessarily needed. And if they are, then other people should come in and just bring them to the project. And this just reminds me of a conversation we recently had within ORU in terms of we're doing this luxury hospitality project, and we were wondering what luxury means to us. And it's not about, that kind of luxurious material, marble or whatever. It's more about how you can have a different relationship to a tree or a forest or or the land or the water. And to us, there's a lot of value in redefining or repurposing how design can bridge those new relationships.
That's beautifully put. I don't know what I would add to that story.
Yeah.
You said it so well. Yeah.
We'll take it. Yeah. We do have a few questions already in the Q&A box, so we can dive into the audience here. Melissa Anders has a question for TERREMOTO. How long did it take for you to curate your values? What was the process? Was it trial and error? And what did it involve, the entire studio or a more specific team?
We started the office 10 years ago, and we started the office with the slightly more innocent, under the slightly more innocent auspices of, can we make gardens that are about ideas? And there was a little bit of a void in American garden making and landscape architecture. We felt that for gardens as micro expressions of culture. And so that's kind of how we started the firm. And then now I think with time and with the fact that it's become a team and with experience, it's evolved into becoming a thing that it originally wasn't. And I believe that like through keeping our hearts and minds open and always being self-critical about why are we doing what we're doing. And also the world has changed a lot in 10 years. Alan and I started the office from just this kind of like, oh, let's start exploring these ideas. And in the last 10 years, with everything that's happened and with our team growing and with us gaining experience, now we're really doubling down on how we practice and why, and trying to be very see-through. There's so much cognitive dissonance in the field of architecture and landscape architecture about like the word, I know ORU mentioned resilience that word has been abused. And I would say sustainability is almost like meaningless in a way. And so doubling down on, well, the terrible fact that doing very little is the most sustainable thing as possible, but we can't do very little. Or can we? And so like kind of asking ourselves all these questions, I think is of great interest to us and has allowed our practice to like meander in terms of how we feel about our principles and ethics, as well as has endowed our built work with a great diversity of aesthetic qualities. That's kind of a rambling response. Story, anything to add?
Yes, I'd like to draw upon what David was just saying about the architectural tools being insufficient, because I think that's something that's shared by the two offices. And I'm actually really surprised that being two practices that seem to be very different end up having a lot of things, shared interests and shared approaches. I'm just going to mention some. Speaking about communities and place as the main or the first client, keeping program to a minimum, visualizing everyone as a collaborator, having an interest in scenarios instead of solutions, and understanding the firm as a project. Many more things, defining what is necessary, accepting uncertainties, and involving the non-human. But so I'm curious, because all of the descriptions of both firms were based mainly not more in the process than the actual physical result. So I'm curious if the conventional architectural vocabulary is still useful or pertinent when we, no longer speak about strategies, but rather if we're mentioning, the door, a stair, or a bathroom, are we still speaking about that when we are involved in architecture? Or would the change be not only in terms of methods and strategies, but also in the final result? I don't know if Oru wants to jump in.
So we actually like to think about design as a process and not designing as the act of getting into the drawing the project and drawing the plan, as David was mentioning, but actually how can you initiate a project? It starts before that drawing happens. So how do you bring people together to collaborate into a table? How do you see that project, not waiting for a client to ask you to design something, but how do you connect people into a common purpose? And then how can the project be designed, constructed, implemented, but more importantly, maintained over time? I think this is very important. We don't want to create projects that then are not useful for the citizens or for the communities. So I think that that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, can I just add that the word design has evolved through centuries, and I think it's time that we continue redefining what that means. To us, we like to think about design as the managerial praxis of building something, and we are, I think, more interested in the project as the strategy that must occur for things to actually happen, and then just leave that as an open-ended process. We're not expecting a final product. So yes, the traditional architectural language is a good starting point, but it cannot be, it can't be paused. Like the world is changing, and we need to keep up with those changes and create new languages and new methodologies, and incorporate the voices of communities, workers, collaborators, and other elements that don't have a voice, like water, nature, and so on.
I would just add that it's not that those words or the terms that you, Fernanda, you were mentioning earlier in terms of the door or the stairs. I think they're not outdated in themselves. I mean, they're useful in expressing, different interfaces of the human experience of a space, whether it's a park or a garden or, a house or whatever, a public space. They're not outdated. It's just how we use them. They're not the end. I mean, of our, or at least for our practice, they're not what we're seeking for. They're just a means to have that interface and an experience. So I think those are not the terms that are outdated. It's more what we do and how we express them as the final product.
I'd also offer that this is going to require change at all levels, like including like the media apparatus, like insofar as the way we tell stories is going to get, and I think the Architectural League is doing a great, well, you're talking to us now, but is doing a great job of it. But sometimes more like, I think they're called like shelter publications or history, legacy publication magazines. They'll like reach out and they'll want to talk to me about a project, and I'll be like, I had nothing to do with this project. It's somebody else in the office. And that cult of personality, like even the Pritzker, it's always given to an individual, or, you know what I mean? I think as things become blurrier and more dispersed, then the way we tell stories and the way we give awards and all of that's needs to change too, alongside architectural practices emerging. Which is exciting.
Really wild too, to think about how I feel like ORU, your practice is like so heady and huge picture and like thinking in these strategic ways. And I feel like TERREMOTO is really like grounded in these really small projects, and like the hand and the just like a tiny backyard is the kind of the testing ground for our ideas. But those ideas, the overlap is really interesting, and I think that's a testament to the fact that like change is coming and change needs to happen across the board, and it's kind of an exciting byproduct of a really scary time.
Also, I think that there's this issue that architects have, that we have to admit there's a lot of ego, and we are a lot about letting go, let others participate, let's be a collective project. And also it's not the object by itself, but what can the project or the design do? How can we improve a marginal community? Or how can we bring water to a place that it's in the context of a water scarcity, right? So yeah, we are focused more on the impact of our design.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen so many projects suffer the passing of time, and then maybe the author is not coming back to learn from what went wrong, and maybe what are the lessons that we can learn to improve our practices. I think that we can learn a lot about mistakes and keep learning, basically.
Okay. Yeah, so we're at time right now. I think we're going to go for just a few more minutes. Yeah, we'd definitely love to see some more audience questions. You can drop that in the Q&A box. I mean, I think this next question applies maybe to both firms. I'm curious what the connection you see between how we value labor and the design outcome of your projects. Obviously, this has been a focus of TERREMOTO and in Tultitlan. You've worked with local labor in Mexico, ORU. So yeah, how does valuing labor really pan out into a better design product, and more importantly, a product that works longer, better for more people?
Joy, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically we just always go into a project believing that builders know how to build things better than we do. So, we come with some ideas and we really want that to be a conversation and a collaboration. And we learn every single project about, how different people would do different things. And it really feels like a team sport. I think in a lot of the industry, unfortunately, there is a bit of an antagonism often, sort of inherent in the contractual relationships between designers and builders. And that seems like a problem to us. It just doesn't make much sense. And I think having those conversations as part of the process always enriches the project. And I think, just as I sort of alluded to earlier, that type of labor is kind of going to be the type of work that we need to do to kind of stem the tide of climate change. Rewilding, working with stormwater, rebuilding soils, doing small scale agriculture. That's the kind of work that we need to be doing, the sort of low tech land-based work. And we need to value that and pay people well enough to do that work and really respect it and have it be a part of the solution, I think, and part of the conversation.
I think ORU does feel the same way as Terremoto in terms of labor. I guess we would just add that we understand labor more at a wider dimension, where it's not only the people that make things, that build things, but also the people that maintain it. And I think we've invisibilized a lot of groups, sort of like women, in that task and over time. And so I think also design, if widening its definition and its role today, needs to acknowledge that and recognize the work of those people that are not even getting paid sometimes, and sometimes they are, but maybe not fairly enough. And so to us, labor needs to open up to that on one hand, and on the other hand, to stay open to contingencies, because things change a lot when faced with reality and construction. I love the idea that Terremoto does, the plan, not working with plans, which is something that our architecture is pretty set on, and thinking of things more as experiences and processes and understanding how they're built over time, and not just at a defined moment or frozen moment.
It's an interesting thing because having that stance, we've realized we have that stance, but we also have the desire to start working on projects that are more public or civic or institutional. That desire to do things in a more ad hoc improvisational way pairs very poorly with present power structures of how projects of a certain scale are built, and those dynamics. And so we're trying to figure out how we back our way into public work or more institutional work while preserving our ability to work how we work best. And so it's where it's a little bit of anyways, it's a thing we're navigating that's fascinating because the way the larger a project gets, the more hierarchical and type A it becomes. And we'd love to figure out how to pierce that kind of more bureaucratic default mode that larger projects come with. So anyways, just a thing that's on our mind.
I feel like if anyone could figure that out, it's maybe ORU. I don't know. Project free.
When do we collaborate?
You should work. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Maybe you should work with us in the Latin American context, which is pretty much as Fernanda knows as well, it's pretty much it's hectic. It's not, even if it's hierarchical and complex in its bureaucratic machine, it's also very uncertain and it keeps changing. And so there's a different adaptability that offices need to have in order to operate within this context. So I'm sure we're going to collaborate at some point in this type
Sounds
of
fun. Don't take a project in the United States. Less fun.
No, and
I think
one of the challenges that seem to be like really evident for both firms and for any firm practicing today is how to exist in between disciplines. And I would like to hear a bit about when you say you like to get your hands dirty, what does that mean in this new redefinition of the discipline between different disciplines?
So I think that we need to learn from other disciplines and learn how to collaborate with them, and not only disciplines, with communities. Communities have a lot of knowledge and a lot to say, and usually these communities don't have a voice, as Elena was mentioning, especially in the context of Mexico, where we are working in marginalized areas that are facing different risks, violence, poverty levels. So how can we bring this visibility? And I also like to propose that sometimes there's this perspective of the technical knowledge that we will arrive and bring you a solution, and we are not doing that. We are not bringing a solution because we don't have solutions. We have many questions. So what we like to do is to connect people and try to connect the dots between certain fields of knowledge.
Yeah, I would just like to add that maybe design has an ability to set the scene for connecting people and choreographing, as Michael Moulton, I believe, mentioned in recently, multiple kinds of participations. You know, I think, yeah, we embrace collaboration, and we know that we don't have all the answers, and we like to inform our thoughts and forms of designing by different fields of knowledge, like, you know, hydrology, geology, biology, science. I think, I don't know, we've talked so much about how science has so many things to say, but it's written and shown in a very hard way for people to understand. And I think maybe design has some abilities to communicate those views or different kinds of informations that are so important.
And following up on that, I think it, like, getting your hands dirty, to me, it requires being uncomfortable with what you're doing. So at some point, it's something that's outside of your purview of your usual kind of context. And it's also accepting that change and that you're not controlling every single decision of what happens in a certain context or spatial configuration. And it also means to me, like, having tough conversations, which we've had at ORU, like, you know, just noticing when there's a work ethics being breached, or, you know, a gender issue showing up, and we need to say something about it. And it's not always easy, because sometimes it's with clients, sometimes it's with collaborators, sometimes it's with teams. And so to me, getting hands dirty has to do with saying that and trying to get to a better place when it comes to that. And one way of understanding it also when it comes to design practices is the participatory processes, which everyone is trying to get involved with. And it's now a requirement, unfortunately enough, but they're not easy. They're not easy conversations. People usually have needs that haven't been met, have not been met. And, you know, they're not, sometimes as pictures show them, all like perfect and happy and with, you know, crayons and drawing. It's a lot more about things that city has failed them in so many ways, and they're really tough conversations. So getting the hands dirty to me has to do with having those tough conversations and bringing them to, you know, to these types of discussions.
So I think we have a question from the audience. Sylvia Rocher asks, how do you start collaborative projects? What types of, for ORU, excuse me. How do you start collaborative projects? What types of clients do you have? And how are our Mexican institutions collaborating with you to support sustainable projects? There's that word again, can't really avoid it, but yeah, go ahead.
So every project is different. We don't have a formula. It depends on the project. So it depends we are working at the community level scale. we're partnered with someone from that community, or for example, in the BioCities project that Victor mentioned, we are partnering with people that actually live in that city and have all the knowledge, and other specialists. So we are a small team. We are not a super big office. We are a very small firm, but we try to expand. So as Elena mentioned, we try to think ourselves as a network or a platform for others to enter and collaborate.
That's right, Adri. I think we like to think about the project more than jumping in right away into design. And that project entails building different kinds of teams, because we don't have the knowledge. There are so many things that we don't know, and the only way to have a better picture of how to understand what we're dealing with is teaming up with local teams or people that are better at some things that we are weaker at, and it's recognizing our faults and reaching out and asking for help, what I think has made us learn so much.
Also, in terms of sustainability, now that you've mentioned it, we believe we also need to get into the financial part of it, as Terremoto mentioned earlier, like the administrative stuff that could be boring, but to us it is not. I think it's an opportunity. And so if we think about that, there's a whole niche of opportunities in funding projects that are not being explored by design disciplines, sort of like green funds or energy bonds, or things that we haven't been exploring from a creative point of view. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
It's also an interesting thing you mentioned about like expertise. The traditional like landscape architecture model of success follows that as you become successful, people start to ask you to work far away. And we're skeptical of that, guardedly so, because it's very tempting from a business perspective, but we believe that the idea that like a successful architect can then come into any region or any place and impose their vision and understand it is wildly naive, and can be very deleterious for the place in which they impose their vision. So it's another thing that we're struggling with and trying to figure out as an office how and if we work in regions that we aren't deeply familiar with. And one way we're doing that right now is by putting our hand up in the air the moment we're out of our comfort zone and saying, we don't know about plans here, or we don't know. And I think being really forthright and honest with each other and about where your expertise ends, and then asking for help, I think is something our profession needs to get much better at doing.
Okay, I think that's where we're going to leave it. Hopefully, with a new collaboration between.
Yes.
Or you?
For sure.
Yeah, we'll find the right one. We're excited.
Yeah, we'll follow up after this lecture.
I'm gonna jump in. Thank you so much, and I wish that we could keep on hearing this conversation for even longer. But although this is the final night of live lectures, please watch for additional firm interviews. And in fact, there will soon be interviews published with both firms here. And videos of all 4 nights presentations will be available on the League's website soon. And just looking forward on the League schedule, April brings a whole new round of programs from in-person events, including a Cooper Union Great Hall current work lecture on April 11th by the Belgian firm 51N4E. And the next session of From Field to Form series, which will be called Making with Earth on April 28th, as well as live online programs. The next FF Distance Edition will be a visit to the Boston firm Lears Weinzappel, and later in the month, Mass Support, which is an online symposium for housing. I think that although I think we're all left with more questions and ideas of process than answers, I think that's part of the point, and it's a great actually place to rather than end the series, to stop for the evening, but continue asking questions and then revisit them next year. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.